Welcome back, viewers at home. I'm so excited to be, talking to a multifaceted professional who wears many hats, that of a health coach, pro fighter, entrepreneur, and a proud hijabi. And as the owner of Primal Wellness, Jess combines her passion for fitness and nutrition with her dedication to empowering women. Tonight, she joins us to share her inspiring journey as a Muslim woman in the male-dominated world of MMA and how she breaks barriers while staying true to her values. Jess, assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah so much for, joining us tonight.
Walaikum salam. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, before we get to, the other aspect of your career choice being MMA, can you please tell us in terms of what inspired you to actually be like, this is what I want to do, or see yourself doing it?
So it was I guess a natural progression coming from working in a media marketing background and getting into a space where I felt like my career was no longer serving me and I wasn't no longer happy. And I actually closed up shop. That was in, I think, 2017 or 2016, and joined my husband full time in his business, which is Pride Fighting Academy. It's an MMA gym, and I began coaching slowly, mainly helping women with weight loss, teaching yoga. And I had been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu up until that point, but not very competitively. But being in that space full time and seeing others, really taking that sport seriously, it was just this natural progression that grew. And I started competing in Jiu-Jitsu more frequently. And after a while, because there are so few women in the sport, I kind of got bored of what the jiu-jitsu scene looked like, and I was looking for the next challenge. And so the opportunity for an MMA fight came along as an amateur. And after the first fight, I was hooked. That was that for me.
And with that, what would you say were some of the challenges that you encountered? And looking back, would you say that you encountered those challenges because you were a hijabi and a woman, or it was just, like a challenge that comes with being in the territory?
So initially, when I started fighting, I wasn't wearing hijab, and so the hijab struggles came, later on in my career. But there were definitely challenges as a female and as a smaller female. It's difficult to find other opponents to get matched in fights, and so after a few amateur fights, again we ran out, so to speak, of opportunities to get amateur fights. And so I ended up going pro purely just to continue my pursuit or enjoyment of MMA. And I went pro quite late in life. I was 36 years old, which is kind of when professional athletes are retiring already. So that came with its own set of challenges, just in terms of, how does the body hold up against 23-year-olds who are just, making their professional debut with, all of the rights, kind of longevity markers on their side. And funnily enough, I then stopped training MMA for a while and moved into the boxing space. I did a bare knuckle boxing fight. I was the first in South Africa to do bare knuckle boxing. And then after that into professional boxing. And that's when I started wearing hijab. And that was quite challenging because it hasn't been done before. Interestingly enough, boxing has these strange kind of codes of conduct in terms of what you're allowed to wear, and hijab had not been done before. So in the MMA scene, after going into hijab, they were quite open to the idea of me continuing fighting in hijab. And internationally, there are quite a few females who have done it successfully. But as a boxer, there aren't any that are doing it professionally. And so there was a lot of challenges with getting the committee to agree for the hijab to be worn in that fight. And alhamdulillah, now that we've done those, we've done that groundwork, we've done the convincing, whether it's for me or for the next woman coming up, I hope that it will be an easier transition for them.
Certainly. And with that, in terms of your journey being in the MMA space and diving into boxing, at what point in time do you then decide to establish Primal Wellness?
So that's an interesting question. That happened just after the genocide began, October 7. And I was actually sponsored by a number of well-known supplement companies as a professional athlete, and my life kind of consisted on making all this content for my sponsorships and fighting. And I began posting and being quite vocal about the genocide and within 1 week, all of my sponsors dropped me because of my stance. I was labeled an extremist. I was, my brand of Islam was just not what that they wanted to associate themselves with. And so I suffered quite a big financial loss very, very quickly. And my reputation was kind of tarnished by these supplement companies. Fights dried up for a while. And subhanAllah, it was one social media comment when I made it public that one particular brand had dropped me because of these views. One social media comment said, well, if we need to boycott this brand, you should just start your own electrolytes.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, wow, okay, let's do this. And so that was kind of the prompt. And it's been a 2-year journey, alhamdulillah. So it's a startup still. And we've bootstrapped it from the ground up. I've learned a lot along the way. But yeah, now we're here.
You know, Jess, you said something quite interesting, and I think there's so many individuals who are in the space of, working with brands that are, supporting Israel or just don't understand the idea around the genocide that's happening in Palestine. And, it's quite an internal fight. It's so easy for us to say, just drop it, just drop them. But there's so much that we don't know that's happening in that individual's personal life. And I'd like for you to share, with them a form of encouragement that you drew from that allowed you to say, you know what, this is greater than, any sponsorship or any brand that I can work with if they're going to go against my stance and my beliefs.
I understand it's difficult for a lot of people, and in the social media space, we've seen certain influencers continue to work with brands that should be boycotted, and they are always quite afraid of where their next income is going to come from because of that. And I can understand that uncertainty. Alhamdulillah, between myself and my husband, like we've always had a very strong commitment and understanding to the fact that rizq comes from Allah, and once a brand or a person has made their feelings known in terms of where they stand, you can just be so grateful that you actually know the truth now about that brand, and know that Allah has removed that from you because it wasn't good for you, and that something better is coming. And so it still stung. It was still a challenge. It was still scary. I think not only because there was a loss of income and a tarnish or an attempt of tarnishing from a reputation perspective, but there was also quite a lot of threats that came with that. So people threatened to boycott the gym, and we had members leave our gym that turned out to be Zionists themselves. So in the kind of immediacy, it was very scary. And then a year later, 2 years later, alhamdulillah, you're able to look back and you go, wow, all of that was removed because it wasn't good for me, and so much better, something better has come. I had no idea. If you had asked me 2 years ago, or said to me 2 years ago, Jason, 2 years time, you're going to own a supplement company called Primal Wellness, and you're probably going to be too busy to be fighting, I would have laughed, because fighting was my whole life. And alhamdulillah, Allah has given me something better.
And with that, speaking on the fact that, you've been so occupied, being an entrepreneur, that, your fighting, career is just, not so easy as it was before for you to be, engaging in. I want to find out from you, how do you then strike a balance where you don't lose doing what you love versus, your new business at that?
Look, I love my new business too, but I think balance is important. Whether it's to be competitive and still compete, or whether it's just to ensure that you live a healthy lifestyle and you are able to get rid of stresses from day-to-day work, whether you are able to take care of your body, because that in itself needs movement and nourishing food, etc. So I try to approach life like I'm in fight camp anyway, in the sense that there needs to be a time for training, there needs to be a time for taking walks in sunshine. And luckily the business that I have is essentially a wellness brand, and so we get to live that wellness ethos day to day. I would love to fight again, but right now finding the time to do both is just not it's not viable. But inshallah, if it's meant to be, it will be.
Subhanallah. And that is lovely to hear. And just with that, there are viewers at home right now who are watching, myself included, who are so inspired by your journey and the idea of being in a male dominated industry. What advice would you share with us tonight in terms of, breaking those boundaries and barriers and just being part of a space because you love it, and not being in a space because you feel like, okay, this is for women or this is for females?
So look, for women who are wanting to train for fitness and self-defense, I think it can be quite intimidating to walk into a gym, a male-dominated space. Essentially, it's got a certain smell about it. There's mainly men around. A lot of women, from a modesty perspective, would only want to train in a female-only environment. And so, from a training perspective, I would say seek out the spaces that are safe for you. And they are growing. There are a lot more Muslim women in the sport, and as there tend to be more Muslim women in the sport, we tend to care more about creating safer spaces for other women.
Yeah.
And so there are more gyms and classes that are available, just for women to train. So if that's one of your concerns, then seek that gym that is open to that. Also, finding gyms that are either female owned or have female leadership just means that it is going to be a naturally safer space for a woman to train in, or for a woman or their children to train in. So that would be my advice where training is concerned. And then I think the other piece of advice that I would give, whether you're wanting to just train or even look at competing, it is at a competitive level. Unfortunately, it has started to be quite sexualized, in the sense that people are waking up to the idea of females competing, but they'd like beautiful females who are showing skin. And moving into hijab, for me, I felt like there was a drop in popularity, and that my fighting style needed to speak more than my physical attributes, and that was quite scary. And then when I stepped into it, and I realized, actually, that's a beautiful thing, for my ability to fight and the way I fight to speak for itself and have it not be clouded by any aesthetics, was actually a very empowering thing for me in the end. So I would just encourage any woman who is wanting to either just start training or to compete, just to hold on to their identity and stay strong to that, and know that just showing up is speaking volumes.
I love how this conversation is not only, professional, but it has a very beautiful essence of, spirituality. And I think this brings me to ask, how did you reconcile, your faith, being a Muslim, and with the demands of being a professional fighter? Because there's so much that you're sharing in around, having to anchor yourself to say, you know what, I'm a Muslim woman, and this is what I need to do. And at the same time, this is what I can do.
So I think having Islam as my anchor has been why I was able to be as successful as I was in my short period as a fighter. In that, from a fighting perspective, and I say this often, there's nothing that gets you into sujood quicker than knowing that you're going to step into a cage and somebody's going to effectively try and kill you.
Oh.
So it keeps you very grounded. And leading with your faith in mind is, it's an incredibly grounding and humbling attribute to have. It takes away from that very egotistical, showboating kind of, I think, reputation that MMA might have, especially in the non-Muslim world. Having said that, spirituality is something that I think flows, and is sometimes elevated and sometimes it's not. And as I've grown as a Muslim and I've gotten a little bit older, there have been moments where I've had to kind of reconcile with, who am I as a fighter, and that aggression and kind of violent demeanor that I need to put forward in order to fight. How do I feel like that living next to the attributes of a Muslim? And so I've gone through my own kind of spiritual and emotional turmoil to kind of decide if being a fighter is even something that I can still do as a Muslim woman. And I think there are days when I show up and I feel like I can channel that aggression, and there's other days where my spirituality and my duties as a Muslim woman feels like it softens me, because essentially, as a Muslim woman in hijab, you channel quite a feminine energy. And then, the flip side of that is a very masculine energy in the gym. And so finding that balance is difficult. And I think it's different for every person.
Yeah. And with that, we know that being a Muslim in this world, there's so many, misconception and stereotypes. And you can only imagine stepping into a space where it's male dominated, and I could be wrong in this assumption to say it's, also dominated by a lot of non-Muslim individuals. What would you say are some of the stereotypes and misconceptions you've encountered, and how exactly did you go about, addressing or handling those stereotypes?
I think that's an interesting question, because with the popularity of UFC now, and with popularity of fighters like Habib and Islam Makhachev and Hamza Chimaev, and there are a lot of very famous, successful Muslim fighters that have kind of broken a lot of stereotypes for us, not necessarily female Muslim fighters representing in hijab, but I think the world has come to understand a lot more about Islam through fighting, because there are these prominent figures who are making dua when they're in the cage, they're making sujood when they're in the cage. The first thing they say after they win or lose is Alhamdulillah. So I think that there's a lot of barriers that have already been broken. And every time you show up in a public space, whether it be a fight or whether it be a platform of another kind, representing your faith should be at the forefront of your intention for being there. And my intention has always been same thing: win or lose, first thing I do is I start with thanking my creator, whether I'm in hijab or not, because I think that in itself breaks a lot of stereotypes. As a revert, as somebody that doesn't look Muslim unless I'm in a hijab, it can shock a lot of people when they find out that I'm Muslim. And so it allows me to break some of those barriers and answer questions and misconceptions that people have. I think the other challenge can often be putting yourself in what you could feel would be un-Islamic environments. So professional fighting spaces are often sponsored by alcohol brands. There's a lot of gambling that goes on. And so being in those spaces can also, come with their own level of just feeling out of place. And it's important to kind of hold your own in that space and know what you're there for.
And in closing, just such a beautiful conversation, quite inspiring, is where to from here for both yourself and Primal Wellness?
Oh, I don't know. We have to see what Allah has in store for me. But my plan has been to try and fight again, whether that be in MMA or in boxing. So we'll see if something like that is in the near future. But for now, the focus has just been growing Primal Wellness. It's a startup. We are doing our best to get into retailers all across South Africa. And really, it's a primal supplement brand that's really about simplifying the supplement space. I think people seem to think that they need to take 10 or 15 different products a day just to be healthy. And I've really tried to compact everything into the smallest amount that you could possibly need, because I think it's an over-marketed space. And that's just a message that I want to continue to share with people in the near future.
Subhanallah. Just Jazakallah so much, for joining us this evening and sharing in your inspiring story, your journey, and hopefully leaving us feeling, quite different in terms of entering male-dominated spaces and also letting go of, brands that don't really serve us, all in the name of I'm trying to, sustain myself or put bread on the table. But Jazakallah so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Viewers at home, that was Jess Mouneimne, who is a multifaceted professional. Not only is she a pro fighter, but also a health coach, entrepreneur, and a proud hijabi. That hope that was quite inspiring for you. For now, let's head over to an ad break. We'll see you just after this.